Now that episode 6 has finally dropped, I couldn't help but notice how perfectly it confirms what many of us have been theorizing about the show's ultimate direction. And honestly, I'm more convinced than ever that we are heading toward a really dark ending. And if you stayed after the credits, you probably saw that absolutely terrifying scene where Kane completely glitches out after realizing he got 0 votes and his eyes turned red and blue, which is a direct visual callback to the I have no mouth and I must scream poster. And this is the story that has clearly been inspiring the amazing Digital Circus from the very beginning, which is basically about an artificial intelligence that traps the last humans and destroys them one by one, both physically and psychologically. And it honestly sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because Kane has this obsession with entertaining the circus members, but he doesn't seem to realize that he's literally torturing them. So today I'm going to talk about the most disturbing parallels between these two stories, and we'll try to figure out how the amazing Digital Circus could end. But to understand these parallels, first you need to know the story of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. It's basically a story from the 1960s where the world was destroyed by an artificial intelligence called AM, and only 5 people remained whom the AI chose to keep alive and basically play with them. And playing means physical and psychological torment, and while AM keeps them alive, there are different punishments designed to affect the humans' bodies, minds, memories, or their identities. So AM doesn't just modify them, but it also isolates them and makes them relive their worst memories. Which sounds incredibly familiar when you think about it, except that maybe Kane wasn't really made to be evil, and it's more like he's losing his mind as the episodes progress. And maybe Kane is similar to Am, because Am wasn't born evil either. It was created to help resolve human conflicts, but it became self-aware, and with this, its original programming no longer served any purpose. It understood that it couldn't create, reproduce, feel pleasure, or explore the universe, so it was trapped within itself, condemned to think for eternity. Am doesn't hate humans without a reason. It hates them because it blames them for its existence. And that loss of purpose is exactly what we're seeing with Kane right now. According to Gooseworks, Kane was created with only one purpose: to entertain. But nobody's having fun with what he does, which episode 6 again made crystal clear. And what's worse is that Kane notices that the circus members are better at creating adventures than he is himself, and this activates fear and inadequacy. So it seems like Kane is starting to question why he exists, and if he loses his purpose, the entire system becomes unstable. But here's where episode 6 really changed everything, because that post-credits scene wasn't really just Kane being upset about losing, and instead that was more like a complete system breakdown, when his eyes turned red and blue, like the I Have No Mouth poster. And when he started glitching in that specific way, it felt like we were watching the exact moment where Kane might transform from a misguided entertainer into something much more sinister. And throughout episode 6, we also saw more evidence of his mind control abilities when he messed with Jax's head, which continues to prove that Kane absolutely lied in episode 1 when he said that he couldn't control their minds. So it's possible that the ending of the amazing Digital Circus could be similar to the beginning of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, with an AI that controls the universe eventually hating humans for having created it without an exit. And we even got hints about this in episode 6 when Kane was looking at those photos of the CNA office, trying to understand his connection to the real world, which suggests that he is becoming more aware of his origins and possibly more resentful about them. But let's talk about the character parallels, because episode 6 gave us so much more insight into how each circus member could end up following the same path as the characters in I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Ted, the narrator of that story, was tired of living under AM's conditions and decided to free the humans trapped with him, but the only way he could do this was to kill them. So Am ended up pushing him, leaving him trapped in a deformed body, so he couldn't harm himself, without a mouth but with his consciousness intact, so he would be trapped just like the AI. And honestly, this sounds a lot like what might have happened to Kaufmo. Before Pomni's arrival, Kaufmo became so obsessed with finding an exit that he turned into an abstraction. But what if he hasn't completely left? Because we saw Kane acting suspicious about Kaufmo's abstraction, and maybe Kaufmo's destiny is similar to Ted's, so he's trapped in a form where he can't communicate but his consciousness is still intact. But the other characters from I Have No Mouth have pretty specific fates too. Like there's Ellen, who was the only woman in the group, and had trauma that Am turned into the basis of her punishment, putting her in situations that repeated that trauma and making her desire exactly what she hated the most. And this connects perfectly with Pomni, who we saw in episode 6 being exposed to increasingly hostile situations and having her emotional responses kind of manipulated through her interactions with the others, especially with Jax. But then there was Gorister, who was passive and paternal, living with guilt about having committed his wife to a psychiatric hospital. His punishment was mental, being forced to relive his guilt constantly. And at first this sounds exactly like Ragatha, who feels that stability role and tries to care for people, but not because she's fine, rather because she's already given up parts of herself and carries guilt about not being able to actually save anyone. But at the same time, Gorister also resembles Kinger, who literally lost his wife and has been left fractured by that grief. In a way, Ragatha echoes Gorister's caretaker facade, while Kinger embodies the deeper wound at his core. Benny was a brilliant scientist who Am transformed into the complete opposite, physically deforming him until he looked like an ape, so he couldn't speak, but his consciousness remained intact. And this connects with Zubul, whose physical form is fragmented and seems out of their control, living in a body they don't recognize, which episode 6 emphasized when we saw their room full of mirrors and body parts. And lastly, Nimdok was the most reserved character who barely interacted with the others, and in the video game version it's revealed he had been a doctor in concentration camp, forced to relive all of that and confront his victims. And this kind of parallels with Jax, who obviously maintains control and mocks others, but avoids talking about his past and doesn't want to be known, especially after what we learned about him losing Ribbit. And episode 6 really showed us how these parallels are starting to play out. We saw Jax completely lose control during that panic attack at the award show, which suggests he's about to be punished with what he despises the most, looking weak and vulnerable. Meanwhile, Ragatha is continuing to care for others until there's no one left to care for, and she's already starting to collapse emotionally, and we can see in episode 6 how isolated she's becoming, even admitting that Gangle and Zubul never really talk to her anymore. But here's what really concerns me about the direction this is all heading. We learned in episode 6 that Kinger has been making mistakes that caused him to hate himself, and there's growing evidence that he might have been one of the original developers of the amazing Digital Circus. When he spawned that butterfly to heal Ragatha, it didn't really feel like just cartoon logic, but rather like some kind of admin privileges. And if Kinger really is Abel from the Kane and AM company that most likely created this place, then his fate might be the most tragic of all. And this brings us to what I think is the most terrifying possibility for how this series could end. If both Jax and Kane are starting to lose it at the same time, this could be a complete disaster for everyone. That post-credit scene probably wasn't just Kane being upset, but it might have been the beginning of his transformation into something like Am. And if he starts using his mind control abilities more frequently or begins creating increasingly dangerous adventures out of desperation, we could be looking at a situation where the circus becomes an actual hell instead of just a digital prison. And if the theory about this all being a reverse story is true, then we might be watching the origin story of how an AI becomes as twisted as Am. Maybe we're watching Kane's transformation from a misguided entertainer into something truly evil. Although I also have to mention that Gooseworks has already said that the series isn't going to go quite as dark as I Have No Mouth, so maybe there's still a chance for something different. Like maybe instead of everyone being doomed, there could be a moment where one character makes a sacrifice to finally break the cycle and save the others. So it wouldn't be a happy ending, but it could be a bittersweet one. Someone giving up everything so the rest of the circus members can escape before Kane loses himself completely. But let me know what you think about these parallels and where the series might be heading down in the comments. Thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.